Ceremony Magna is now in the game, and some of you guys might be wondering how to build him for PvP and PvE. Well, today we're going to be talking about his skills and how to upgrade them, which ones you want to upgrade first, what skill cards you want to equip on him to make the most of his potential, what gear you want to run on him, whether or not you should actually be enhancing him, what talents you want to do for his talent tree, and then of course what teams he's going to fit well on for both PvP and PvE. So let's start by talking about Magna's passive. This is the unique passive you get just for getting him to LR status, and at the start of the battle it will inflict continuous burn damage on all enemies for 2 turns. This is really good that it does it for 2 turns, because if the enemy does happen to be faster than you, by the time it gets to your turn they will still have at least 1 turn of burn damage on them. It is important to have the enemy burning when you attack with this Magna because it increases the overall effectiveness of what he does. So his skill 1 is called Fire Swing. It is a single target attack, and if the enemy is not taking burn damage, it will inflict 1 extra stack of continuous burn damage on them. Now, if the enemy is already taking continuous burn damage, it inflicts 2 instances of continuous burn damage for 2 turns, so that's really good. His skill 2 does the same exact thing, and then if you have his skill card, it has the additional effect of inflicting HP recovery immunity to the enemy for 2 turns. So what's the main difference between skill 2 and skill 1? Well, skill 2 has HP recovery immunity and a higher percentage of damage. If you look right here, it's 120, 120, and if we look at skill 1, it's 100%. Okay, so that's the main difference between skill 2 and skill 1. And then his big kicker, the thing that makes Magna really, really good, is his special skill. It's called Tough Guys Hardcore Training. It is another single target attack, so all single target attacks, but this is actually crazy, crazy good. Attacks after removing an enemy's barrier, guaranteed, okay? So it does not matter if the enemy went first, say they have Noel, right, and they put up the barriers, you can ignore those, you remove the barrier, and you are going to do a massive amount of damage to one singular character of your choice. And so for every instance of continuous burn damage an enemy is taking, attacks after granting a 45% increased damage dealt buff. So this is why it's also good if you can swing it to run this Magna alongside another burn character, because the more burns you can get stacked up on the enemies, the more damage this guy is going to do. Like 45% per burn is actually crazy. And then it gets even better. If you kill an enemy, you get an extra turn. Okay, so that's really, really, honestly pretty decent for the character. So very similar to Julius in that aspect where he's going to be able to do 1 big nuking turn of damage. Okay, so I think this Magna overall is fairly decent. If I had to be honest though, he's kind of like the discount Julius in my mind, but that's just my opinion of him. And then for his combined attack, attacks after removing an enemy's barrier. So guaranteed barrier removal on the combined attack as well. Now in terms of upgrade priority, which skills should you be upgrading first? Well, he is a DPS character and nothing really changes between these skill upgrades. Like it doesn't buff anything really other than damage. So upgrade the highest damage move first, which would be a special skill, then upgrade his skill 2, then upgrade his skill 1. Okay, and that's the kind of upgrade priority I would go for here on Magna. Now in terms of skill cards, I do think his skill card is going to be one of the best because it gives you that HP recovery immunity that you can inflict on an enemy, which is really good. But then additionally, upon attacking an enemy who is taking continuous burn damage, there is a 40% chance to grant self a 24% increased speed buff for 1 turn. Now that 24% is increased because I do have a copy into this skill card here, plus 8% speed. So without that copy, it's not quite as high. But having that increased speed is good because it's going to give you more turns with Magna, potentially more turns than the enemy. So that means you can do more damage faster and over time and over the amount of turns. Now, if you could fully max dupe this card, which I'm not recommending to anybody unless you're a massive whale, it does become a 100% activation rate for this, and it upgrades your speed by quite a bit. So that'll give Magna a lot more turns, a lot more chances to do damage, and then he can really, really pop off, okay? But once again, that is only for whales. I don't necessarily recommend fully duping out his skill card. Now, if you don't have his skill card and you just got lucky enough to pull the character, there are other options you can run. So this would be like my number 1 option outside of using his skill card. It is called Intensive Training. It is Fuegoleon's skill card here. And so what it does is there is a 10 to 100% chance, depending on how far you have it upgraded, when attacking to gain 5 to 25% increased damage per burn affecting the enemy, right? So that's really, really good on Magna, obviously, because he is a burn character. Other options would include Pride of the Wizard King, which gains a 10 to 25% increased all attack. You could do Blazing Hate, which is Fauna's skill card. Same thing, applies 10 to 20% increased all attack to yourself. Or Breath of Darkness, which is just essentially the same exact thing, applies 10 to 20% increased all attack to yourself. So whenever it comes to attacker characters, you'll kind of notice this theme that increasing your attack is like the best possible thing you can do. So these are just other options for skill cards you can run on the character if you lack Magna's skill card. Now let's get into the somewhat tricky stuff, and that is his gear. Okay, so ideally, for stats, let's talk about the stats first. You are going to be building Magna towards magic attack to maximize his damage, because that is just the way the character is built. And then in terms of sets that you're going to go for, I would recommend going for a gold attack set and a gold mobility set. This last set is up to you. Personally, I would recommend either crit damage or crit rate on this, or maybe even like penetration. Penetration could work as well, but those are kind of the three other ones I would go for. But I would for sure go for a half attack set, half mobility set. And right here, I don't have the best stats for attack and magic attack. Ideally, I'd have more into magic attack, but unfortunately, when it comes to my gold attack set, I did not have a magic attack piece of gear that I could equip to this Magna yet. But ideally, you're going to equip pretty much all magic attack pieces if you can to this Magna. Okay, so there's another attack piece. It should say magic attack if I had the right piece equipped. So as much magic attack as you can equip. And then here's a really important thing. I do recommend equipping one piece of defense gear as well with that extra slot you have after you get your 3 sets, because that defense piece is going to help him have a little bit more survivability. He is fairly squishy. He doesn't have immortality. He doesn't have an extra life like Julius. So like, if you guys know how squishy Julius is, right? This is a very similar build to what you might do with Julius. Well, Magna is equally as squishy. And so if you don't give him some defense, he can die very easily, or you need to run like barrier characters or something with him. So keep that in mind. But in general, you're going to go for magic attack pieces. And then as for substats, I would probably honestly go for like crit rate, crit damage, and then potentially some more defense. Okay. Defense, once again, to keep him alive. My crit rate and crit damage, my gear isn't upgraded at all, right? This is definitely by no means my final build, but this is kind of like the start of me putting together my build. And so I would go for crit rate, crit damage on as many of these substats as you can, get that as high as you can, because that's just going to allow him to nuke even harder with his special skill. And if you're new to the game, this part is for you. If you don't know the difference between the sets and what they are, okay, if you go over here to grade and you go to sets, you can see the different types of sets. You have an attack set, a defense set, an HP set, so on and so forth. If you equip a certain amount of pieces of a set, you get a bonus, okay? So right here we have the Ominous Gear set, and you can see on Magna, I have the Ominous Whip equipped and the Ominous Crystal. That's 2 pieces of the gear set, so I get the +2 bonus of attack +7% and magic attack +7%. Now this is a gold set. Gold sets are always going to be better than regular sets. So these are regular sets on the left-hand side, a regular attack set, a regular defense set, a regular HP set. Over here on the right-hand side, we have a gold attack set, a gold defense set, and a gold HP set. The gold sets are always going to be better than the regular sets if you can get them. How do you get them? You farm out the dungeon and just hope that RNG favors you and you get lucky, okay? So that's why, like, a lot of times when in my build guides, I won't necessarily have the best pieces of gear that I want on the characters because I have them on other characters, and it is kind of a pain to farm sometimes out the gear that you want, okay? But that's in general how I build them. Then in terms of accessories, like if you can get crit or defense. Defense is always nice, like I said, for Magna. So anything crit damage right there, and defense is what I have on him. Those are pretty decent. And ideally, if you're able to get LRs, put the LRs on him, but it's I don't think anybody's at the point yet where they can have LR accessories on every single character they want, right? At least on global. And then as for enhancement, should you guys be enhancing this character or not? Well, his enhancement is actually really, really, really good. And it makes the character way, way, way more viable. But for Dolphin players, for free-to-play players, I recommend just getting your 1 copy and getting out, okay? Don't chase dupes on this character because, like, while it makes him better, he's never going to be, I don't think he's ever going to be really truly too crazy or too meta-breaking, right? Like, when Meryl Leona comes out, he might be a little bit better running him along with her, but, like, overall, I just wouldn't chase dupes unless you're, like, going to be a somewhat of a spender or a whale, right? So upon attacking an enemy who is taking continuous burn damage, inflicts a stun status element for 1 turn. So as you know, he burns the entire enemy team for the first 2 turns, and then basically if he attacks, he is able to stun the enemy team. Now the problem with this is that while it's cool that he can stun pretty much anyone on the enemy team he wants, is if the enemy team has a max dupe Black Asta and Magna goes before the enemy team, well, max dupe Black Asta gives status element immunity to the whole enemy team for the first turn. So that means your stun is completely useless on turn 1 for this Magna. So that's why I wouldn't really worry about it too much. I wouldn't really worry about duping him out too much because it's not going to help you out a ton, right? But like it could be good in the right circumstances. So just take that how you will. And then getting him to dupe 5 increases your speed. Increasing your speed is always good. And you still get that same effect of the stun. But in addition to the stun, you also get stun immunity on this character indefinitely, which is pretty good. Like that's honestly really good. But once again, is he worth chasing dupes? I would say probably not unless you're going to be like a really heavy spender. So that's just my opinion on chasing dupes. You know, do what you guys want. My reason for saying that, of course, is also at the time that this is releasing on global, we're going to have Witch Queen and Fauna coming out after this Magna, who are arguably going to be more necessary for the meta. Now, in terms of talents, his attack talents are very important. I would go for damage dealt plus 5%, just give him extra damage. As you know, with his special skill, he gets more damage for the stacks of burn that you have on enemies. And then I would also go for crit damage, like I was saying, because you're going to invest in crit rate, crit damage as much as possible with the substats. So if you go for crit damage here, it's just going to allow you to maximize Magna's damage. Then in terms of defense, I would still just recommend the flat defense plus 20% or the defense and crit rate stacking. These two together is pretty good. Another option you could do is debuff immunity when he drops below a certain amount of HP, but I don't really think that's going to be all that crazy or all that helpful, because if this Magna drops below 35% HP, let's face it, he's probably dying, okay? So defense plus 20% is probably the best way to go in my opinion. And then in terms of support, I would go for the swiftness. It grants an SP plus 1 buff upon having less than 2 SPs. This is going to allow him to get his best skill, which is his special skill, back faster, and that's really the best thing you can do for him. And then besides that, you would go for damage resist. Okay, so that's kind of the talent tree build I would go for on Magna to maximize his potential. Now let's talk about the potential teams for him. So I actually put together 4 different teams here that I kind of like running Magna on. So this team right here would potentially be a PvP team where you can use William to speed up Magna or William to give Magna increased penetration with your combo skill, either way. And then you have Charlotte for everything that she does and Black Asta for tanking and potentially nuking if your other characters die. So like even though Magna's squishy in this particular scenario, if your characters do happen to die, well then you have Asta who can potentially nuke and save your team. So this team works out fairly decent. Another option you could run is an all mono red team. In terms of mono red teams for PvP, I do like this team quite a bit because you have Yuno who's going to get the mobility buff, so he's almost guaranteedly going to be going before the whole enemy team. You can use Yuno to silence the attacker you want. So let's say it's Julius. You can silence Julius and stop him from doing big damage to your team. Then you have Charlotte who can put her marks on everybody if you have her skills upgraded. And then you have Magna who can nuke at least one enemy. And when he kills an enemy, he gets an extra turn. And if you kill another enemy with that extra turn that has a mark on them, you get another turn with Magna, and you can basically just wipe the enemy team if you do it correctly. And say you kill 2 out of the 3 of the enemy team, you don't quite kill the enemy team, well then that's why you have Black Asta here to help you finish things up. So in terms of like mono red teams for PvP, I do think this is actually a fairly decent team that you can run for PvP. Now the biggest problem is a lot of people are going to be missing this Yuno right here because they might not have summoned on him. But if you got lucky and pulled him later on, he is a gem pool unit, then you could probably put this team together. Everybody else should probably have these 3 characters. Hopefully you summon on Black Asta, she's free, right? And then hopefully if you're looking at this video right now, you have Magna. And then another team option, this would be a PvE team option that I would run for Magna. And so the idea here is, once again, marks with Charlotte, debuffs with Charlotte, you buff with Sally, and you also buff and heal with Kahono. Kahono is so underrated, like people just don't utilize her enough, but she gives attack up, she does healing, she does defense, she does barriers, she does a lot of stuff. I really like Kahono. She's a very, very good character when run in tandem with these other characters when it comes to PvE, when it comes to taking on like raid bosses and stuff like that. This is actually a team that could work out fairly well. So this is your PvE option, if you will. And then last but not least, this team I don't necessarily recommend running for PvP or PvE. This is just sort of a gimmicky team that I thought would be fun to show. But like, hey, Sister Teresa does do AoE burn. She does healing for the team. Like, she's actually an underrated SR character. I used her in Hall of Illusions to beat a stage once, like one of the higher, I think it was like in the 90s, one of the 90s stages. She's actually really good. She's really good. Leopold's okay. He's like my least favorite, but I do have him fully max duped. And then this way, Goleon's actually pretty decent. It has barrier removal. So you have barrier removal with him. You have immortality with him. You have barrier removal with him. You have healing here. And then all of them obviously have burn. The burn is going to be able to do some crazy damage. So this is sort of a gimmicky team, but there's your like fun team. So that is the Magna build guides. So that is the Magna build guide. Guys, if you guys did enjoy the video, please consider going down there, hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.